much for being here today. I'm actually just going to say thank you for being here. My name is Emily Messia with the Greater Brownsburg Chamber of Commerce and the Interim Executive Director. So thank you for your time, for your dedication to educating yourself, and for supporting our cause. We definitely appreciate that. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Vicki real quick. She want to do some administrative things real quick.
Hi everybody, I'm Vicki Murphy. I'm the Director of Communications for Brownsburg Schools, and I was a past president of the board for the Chamber, and I really appreciate all the work that the Chamber does in our community and opening up things like this important topics to our membership and to our community. So thank you for being here as part of that. I want to let you know restrooms across the hall if you need anything, and there's a water fountain over there, and other than that, we appreciate you finding us. I gave Tom a hard time because last year I think he drove around in the rain for like an hour, couldn't find the back door. He found the back door today, so we appreciate that. But again, we appreciate y'all for being here and supporting the Chamber, and enjoy the session.
Thank you so much. Also want to take a quick moment to thank my partners with the other chambers in the county. This is a collaborative effort, so I appreciate Avon, Danville, and Plainfield Chambers for their contributions in helping us to put on this wonderful event for you all. Also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for their generosity and also helping to contribute to this effort as well. I would like to have first William come up with the Community Foundation to say a few words about their contribution as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm William Rothhamel. I think I know most of you from the Community Foundation. Community Foundation has a simple mission. We're just here to make Hendricks County a better place. We like to encourage collaboration, and this is a great collaborative effort to help educate our community on important needs in the community, and we are so pleased to partner with our chambers and with Duke Energy to support this. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you. And before we bring up our next sponsor, I also want to thank our guest speaker today, Luke Messer. He is the Chief Executive Officer for the Indiana Business Health Collaborative, and we're going to hear more about his bio and all the wonderful things he has to share with us here shortly. And before we get there, I'd like to bring up Jean from Duke Energy to tell us some more about their generous contribution to this efforts as well.
Yes, okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. When we put together this public policy initiative, we really wanted to focus on what businesses are facing, the challenges from a public policy perspective that they're facing in running their business. And the effort is to help you get information so that you can run your business, right? So that's what chambers do, is they fill in the gaps from a public policy perspective on advocating and educating our business, because you're busy every day running your business. So you should look to your chambers as a source of information, and this is a great example of how that works. So I appreciate you being here. Duke Energy is really pleased to support this work because our businesses are critical, self-serving. We want meters running, so if your businesses are working, you're using electricity, and as a part of that commitment, these opportunities for us to support it helps you as a business. So Duke Energy will always be involved in our community and are grateful to do that. So I have the honor of formally introducing Luke.
Oh, wow. To be short.
Play the music, please. And I'm just going to read this real quick. The Indiana Business Health Collaborative is led by former U.S. Representative Luke Messer, who serves as chief executive. Having spent much of his professional career working to advance policies geared toward promoting a robust and competitive business climate in the state of Indiana, Luke is uniquely qualified to represent our members and their objectives. Luke served 3 terms in the U.S. House, representing Indiana's 6th congressional district from 2013 to 2019. He was the chairman of the Republican Policy Committee for 4 years, where he led hearings on conservative clean energy agenda, women in the 21st century workforce, law enforcement, and the American worker. He's served on the House committees on financial services, education and the workforce, budget, and foreign affairs. As an elected official, Luke was well known for his ability to build bipartisan coalitions among his colleagues to solve complex problems. He developed this important skill set while serving in the Indiana House of Representatives from 2003 to 2006, when he represented House District 57. And am I correct that that's Shelbyville?
It is Shelbyville and Columbus, although I also grew up in Greensburg, so that's...
He's a all-around Hoosier. So please help me and welcome Luke.
Thanks, Jean, Emily, Vicki. Thanks, everybody. Is the microphone, well, you may have to teach me how to do the clicker here real quick. Oh, right here? Yep. And it'll advance this way. I should have done this important work before. So I just have to say this real quick, because Emily was saying, she wished the crowd was bigger. I wasn't even going to tell this story, but it's a true story that I think is important to know for anybody who's in and around public office. I once had the pleasure of running in a congressional primary against Mike Pence before he was elected to Congress. And some of you would know Mike Pence had a pretty significant career after that. So you might have a sense of how that campaign went. And so I was in, one of my events as you're going around as a young candidate. I was 30 years old running for Congress, was in Bartholomew County, Columbus, where Mike Pence was born and raised. And I showed up for this event, and the person that was hosting it was just me and the other person, And about 20 minutes went on, and still me and the other person, and another kind of 10 minutes, and just me and the other person. And so I turned to them and said, well, there isn't much of a crowd here. And they said, well, no, sir, there's not. And I said, well, it's really just me and you. And they said, yes, sir, that's right. And I said, well, did you tell them I was coming? And they said, well, no, sir, but I'm going to find out who did, And so, the funny thing is, this is, this is what you do. You get out, you talk to people. This is a great crowd of people because of the influence you have, the friends and neighbors that you're a part of. And if we want to make change happen in our state, if we want to make the right things happen in our state, we got to get out and come together and try to make that happen. And I'm going to start here. I'll probably come back to it in a minute. But this organization that I now lead, that was a very kind bio, but I always say I'm a former a whole bunch of things. And now I'm the chief executive of the Indiana Business Health Collaborative, which I don't mind, just kind of knowing the age of the people in this room, I don't mind saying this way. In some ways, I might say is born out of a midlife crisis, okay? And what I mean by that is that, look, I've been very blessed to serve the state in a lot of different capacities. I'm now back in a state in more of a private sector capacity, and I've been trying to look for ways to make a difference and bring our community together to drive the right outcomes for our state. And as I went around and talked to folks and friends from all kinds of different sectors, what I found was in the healthcare sector that candidly, a lot of the different people that work in that sector, when you talk to them privately, they agree with each other a whole lot more than they seem to agree with each other when they speak in a public hearing someplace, right? So my thought was this, and I started asking folks, what if you could have a group of people, a group of entities, a group of organizations that came together and started having, almost a safe place, conversations where we could try to figure out where do we agree on focuses of areas that need change, and then candidly, for some of the business people in this room, places where we might have business best practices that aren't kind of happening on the scale that they could happen if others understood the potential that was out there in the private market without really any public policy changes at all. So with that, this was in some ways kind of anybody here seen the movie Jerry Maguire? Right? So this was in some ways kind of almost my Jerry Maguire set of values and mission after talking to people. I'm going to stand here close enough so you can hear me. So if we focused on these areas, achieving cost savings through market-based strategies, improving healthcare quality through patient-centered outcome-focused strategies, accelerating direct-to-employer partnerships and tailored insurance solutions, maintaining a healthy workforce, which is a big challenge, strengthening Indiana's economic competitiveness and ability to attract and retain talent, and advocating for effective changes in healthcare. You know, who's interested in that, all right? Well, it turns out all these people, because what started to happen is I went around and had a bunch of private, a bunch of conversations, and we have been able to pull together everybody from large businesses like Lilly, Cummins, Zotec, Cook, to our university community, to physician groups, to the hospitals, to the insurers like Elevance. I would say, to civic organizations like the Indiana Farm Bureau and the Indy Chamber of Commerce. I mean, my big ask for you all today is really two things, and we'll get back to it maybe hopefully in a discussion session, but, and I'll get again back to the name, Indiana Business Health Collaborative. But one of the things we want to do and need to do is enhance our business presence and enhance our chamber presence, because we believe that that's a voice that is not heard loud enough in this broader public policy debate. I can tell you as a former member of Congress, even in, say, something as controversial as the debate around Obamacare, I think there are a lot of elected figures who think, well, yeah, I mean, we just need to have more of what we used to have, right? And you talk to businesses and they're like, well, that's not okay, right? Because the cost curve is heading in a direction that's not sustainable, and we don't have the quality of outcomes that we need. So, I think what I hear from the business community is I'm not sure I got the answer, but I sure know we got a problem, and we got to figure out how we come together and make those changes happen. And it's been fascinating over the course of the year how I think in some ways, in this kind of organized way, it's the first time that some of these hospital execs, insurance execs, and others have really heard in at least a kind of roundtable format, the challenges that the average employer is facing. So here we are to the logo, the Indiana Business Health Collaborative. Every one of those words in this title matter. I mean, obviously it's an Indiana-based organization. It's focused on health. We want to have the business voice be heard, but I say the most important word in the title is collaborative. We're not coming together to punch each other in the face. We're not coming together to argue. We're basically trying to recognize that, this is a really complicated ecosystem, and you're not going to be able to drive solutions until you can bring folks together. I was thinking about the kind bio that was told me before, whether I was a bipartisan bridge maker or not, and I did try to be. That's not something that's particularly popular right now if you're trying to run for office. But frankly, it's something that we're going to have to figure out if we're going to be able to solve any of the big challenges we face as a state. As part of Collaborative, we've gone out and we've surveyed our clients, and I mean our clients, I think of them as clients, but all the different members of our organization. There's a lot of different ideas, and that's kind of the word cloud of what we heard. I told you about my Jerry Maguire paper, so basically through then all the conversations and work together, we came up as a group of folks with a focus on these 5 basic principles. I'll run through you really quickly what they all mean. First, collaboration. I've already alluded to that. We got to work together to get these things done. Second, competition, which really has kind of 2 parts to it. First, just the simple recognition that for Indiana to compete against our friends and neighbors, for regions to compete against other regions, access to quality health care and better health outcomes is important for us just to be competitive as a state. Second, just the idea that many of the best solutions that we need to drive the kind of changes in outcome we need in healthcare are competition-based, and opening up markets to allow that. Mercy and I were talking earlier about, for example, getting rid of non-competes, and then she pointed out to me that we need to be broader in the way we get rid of non-competes in healthcare. Third, education. I have to tell you, I talked to my friends in the health world, and they say, man, if we could just get everybody to understand how hard our job is. But I point out to them, yeah, and we need to talk to employers and understand how hard healthcare is for them. We need to talk to legislators and understand how the challenges they face in dealing with health policy. Look, the state has $1 billion shortfall that largely is based on a couple policy decisions that were made in healthcare. And this is, again, a complex ecosystem. So we've got to educate each other. Third is commitment. What I said is, I'm not really interested in writing a white paper and just saying, hey, we fixed healthcare. All you got to do is do what this white paper says and then walk away from it. Like, if we're going to do this, we're going to frankly have to change and recalibrate and be committed over the long term. And then results. Nobody's interested in just like a debate society that gets around, talks to each other, and doesn't try to drive any outcomes. And I think we have some potential, I hopefully get to it, that's kind of emerged from our work just this year. Not a silver bullet, but an important answer. So we organized around 5 work groups, which, the importance of data in driving our conclusions. I think we've got a lot of work to do. We're not as far along on this topic as I would like, but you have some very sophisticated businesses that are not all that sophisticated when it comes to consuming healthcare. And yet there are some, I'll just make a very sort of direct comparison, a direct analogy that's I think this room will get. I think a lot of our hospitals feel like, hey, we've got some employers that are doing direct relationships with us. Of course, everyone understands how to do that. And the reality is many don't, right? And so figuring out how we take those best practices and scale them, frankly, I think this region of the state's probably doing a better job at that than some, based on some information I've picked up over the course of the last year. Rural and urban health outcomes, we were talking earlier about, if you look at the public policy landscape or the economic landscape of Indiana over the course of the last 20 years. I think there's a lot to be proud of, particularly in communities like the communities you all are from here today. But the big challenge we face as a state is that you get outside the donut and the level of prosperity is much different. And there are at least 3 or 4 things that we've got to figure out that you have to have access to have high quality of life in the rural parts of the state. But access to high quality health care is a very important part of that. Cost transparency and barriers to competition, mentioned that a little bit in a conversation just a second ago with Mercy, but something that's emerged, again, probably obvious to my friends that work directly in healthcare, but we are on the verge of a crisis from a workforce perspective. Both burdens and the way both profit and paperwork have changed over the course of the last 20 years. It's just frankly a lot less attractive place to go if you're a really bright, ambitious person as far as building your career. And you've got a lot of folks pushing towards retirement, and we've got to get serious as a state about what we're going to do to grow our healthcare workforce, or we're going to have an even bigger crisis in front of us. Here's some of the things we've done. We do a series of roundtables. We're about to release 3 different policy papers. I'm going to talk to you about a study in a second. This is the morning of the Indiana Republican Convention this summer, and Mike Braun was focused enough on healthcare to come and talk to our group. We've been meeting with legislative leaders. I was with Chris Garton last night about 5 o'clock talking about the work that we're trying to pull together. I want to talk to you real quickly about this research, maybe talk to you about one solution, and then, hopefully, and I understand it's not required, but happy to answer questions and kind of hopefully have a little bit of a dialogue. I have seen some nodding heads, at least, as I've talked through the course of this, and would love to hear more from you. So, based on the whole context I described to you before, I thought it was important to try to pull together the facts, the stats about kind of where we are as a state now. Everything I know about driving change, I need to go on a path of losing at least 20 pounds. Well, the start of that is like, what do I weigh today? And stepping on a scale and figuring it out, right? And so whatever it is that you're trying to do and accomplish, you have to start with a reasonable measure. Near Minachemi at the Fairbanks School of Public Health is like the person that led this effort, pulled together a study that was an update of a study that had been pulled together 4 years ago. Our essential goals in the study were this: to compare Indiana to neighboring states and the U.S. overall, describe trends in those variables since 2020, and help key stakeholders frame major issues based on that. Here's some of the things. Can you all hear me if I step away from the mic? Sometimes it's easier for me if I can see it, right? So here was the essential premise, and it's probably, I may have this a little bit out of order. Let me skip ahead and say this. Here's essentially what we found. that despite sort of some of the hyperbolic rhetoric of some studies and other groups that have been out there, Indiana is more or less in the middle of the pack when it comes to cost of health care. There has been a debate about price, and this is a pretty sophisticated room, so I'll sort of just make this point. Price is not irrelevant, right? But cost is based on more than just price. Cost is, do you go more times to the doctor? And so we believe that the number that's most relevant is cost. That's the real, that's what the number really is, right? Not just, you could have a car, let's use this analogy. You could have a car that the list price is $50,000, but you sell it for $35,000. Okay, well the cost is $35,000, not the price. So we think it's important to focus on cost. We're in the middle of the pack on cost, we're in the middle of the pack on premiums, but as I made the point, that's not really a cheerleading moment because we're not in the middle of cost on income, and we're way not middle of the cost on outcomes, right? Like our health outcomes are really bottom 10 of the country is the reality. So, bunch of language, I'll share this with you. The study I'm going to make sure gets emailed to you all so you can look at it. But so our then premise was, and there's a couple pages of stuff that I won't bore you with, I'm going to come back to this slide. So if you set that sort of big picture view, and there's more detail to it, but that's it in a summary. Then the premise of the study was this, okay, if that's where we are, because even if we have those things, by the way, something else that should be said, we can be in the middle of the pack and it still be really expensive, right? It's like $11,000 a person. So we all know that back to that kind of beginning premise I told y'all, like status quo is not good enough, right? So we came to this, okay, so if you look at that, you understand that landscape, and you say, okay, but status quo is not acceptable, what makes Indiana different? How are we different than other people? And here's sort of the 5 things that we saw that where Indiana is outside sort of the norms of our neighbors. And you'll see when you look at the study, if you're geeky enough to want to get into that stuff, we have like this kind of slide rule, and it'll compare where we are to neighboring states and how we are to the national average. Here's the 5 ways we're a little different. 1, we have higher out-of-pocket costs for the consumer than neighboring states by at least 10%. Some of that is based on high deductible plans that many of us would say are not necessarily bad, right? It's not bad necessarily that the customer has some skin in the game when they're deciding. I think one of the things we got to be mindful of as a state is there may be some wellness, if you're a 55-year-old person like me and you need to get a physical every year, it's probably a pretty good idea that be a pretty cheap thing for you to go do, right? So I think we need to think about the way we use high deductible plans, but that's not necessarily bad, but that's something that's different with us. We have a very high prevalence of self-insured plans. I think it's almost 2/3. That's one of the very highest in the country. I think we're like top 4. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but there are some studies that show that self-insured plans aren't as effective at negotiating our best prices compared to others. Second, low penetration of commercial value-based payment models. I have to tell you, I'm not a healthcare expert in all this stuff, but essentially value-based care models are the idea that you pay more of a flat fee and we're driving people towards their outcomes. We don't really have a plan for that. It's a trend across the country. We have a huge, this says physician shortages, but in almost every area, everything from pharmacists to rehabilitation services. We have workforce shortages that I think we could get incredibly aggressive about it tomorrow and it will take us years to solve, right? So we've really got to get serious about it. And then this is probably the hardest. We have very high burdens of chronic illnesses, mortality, and risky behaviors. Let me go here. So, give you kind of one example of something. And again, we were laughing earlier. Some of this health policy stuff, man, I know your eyes can glaze over right away. But by bringing all these folks together, let me give you an example. It's not the silver bullet solution, but an example of something that we've sort of discovered this year. So, high shortages of healthcare physicians, and I happen, through collaboration on this project, Marian University is part of this. We have two major health, physician universities, producing for universities, IU and Marian. IU sends about half of their physicians to residencies out of state, and they're going to probably keep doing that, frankly, because IU thinks that's kind of sexy and that makes sense. I mean, I'm not trying to throw stones at them. I guess that's kind of a stone, but that, but Marian sends a third. Marian was created to have more Indiana physicians, and they send a third of their physicians out of state. Why is that? Because there aren't enough residencies here to fill that, okay? So then, okay, why are there not enough residencies here? Well, here's what we find, that residencies have historically been funded by Medicare funding through some form, or not by Medicare, through a formula that is based on Medicare funding, okay? So it's federally funded, this formula through Medicare. But then I start asking, okay, but wait a minute, like, if we know we don't have enough physicians, do you think our policymakers might be interested in, like, for $10 million, having a bunch more physicians here in our state? And I'm not saying it's just 10 million, but you know what I'm saying? It's not an enormous number in the scope of what we spend as a state. People say, well, yeah, that makes some sense. Well, how's this done? Well, there's a residency board in our state, okay? But candidly, right, if you're serving, with all earnestness on a civic board, the residency board, and someone came to you and said, I think we should increase our residencies by 50% this year. But that would just sound crazy, right? If you were just looking at it from that perspective. But if you start talking to other policymakers and get this ecosystem together of people are starting to say, well, yeah, maybe we should, right? I mean, what kind of incentives could you create to have physicians be willing to move to the more rural parts of the state? There are some programs in the most impoverished counties where you can get reimbursement for your student loans to be there, but those programs aren't that robust. And again, for what is not a ton of money in the scope of everything else we're doing as government. So what's happened? We've got this residency paper. They're also working on something in preceptors, which is as I've learned this year, it's a fancy word for residencies in other areas of health. And I think we're building a coalition of people who are going to go to the legislature and ask for a really aggressive effort to try to ramp up workforce. Now, again, that won't change things tomorrow, but I believe it would not have happened on this cycle if we had not pulled this crowd of people together and started having those kinds of conversations. And it's the kind of conversation we want to bring to all these other areas of public debate. Look, there's a lot of money in healthcare. I'm not going to pretend for you. I mean, the easy part about the solution I just gave you is it will require some burden on hospitals and others for the training, but it's also bringing money to them, not taking money from them, right? So I'm not going to tell you that in some ways that's easier than other topics, but I'm convinced that if we can bring folks together, we can drive those kinds of outcomes in, other subject matters and make a difference. And so that's kind of, in essence, what we're about. And so questions, comments, donuts, whatever anything anybody wants to do. Yeah.
Well, question on your shortages that we have. I mean, you think about doctors or nurses or physical therapists, I think we'd all agree get paid fairly well, right? It's not bringing up McDonald's. So why are there shortages in that sector?
So I am going to put a friend of mine on the spot and ask Mercy to answer that question for you as someone who works in that space. And then if she's not willing to, and I will tell you, by the way, everybody else just be ready because every other hard question is going back to you guys. But anyway, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, please.
So my name is Mercy Hilton. I'm a physician. This is my 24th year as a physician. And I grew up in healthcare. Both of my parents are nurses. Before I went to medical school, I was a pharmacist. So I've been in this world for a long time. My original training was I did a double residency at IU in pediatrics and emergency medicine. And when I started 24 years ago, the landscape here was very, very different. And what changed, I think, is the type of thing that is driving people out. So, I graduated from the 28th grade, 14 years after high school, before I had my first real job. I mean, I worked as a pharmacist for a little bit, but that was how long it took. So a lot of investment into our education. And then you start working, and when I first started here, we had 80% of physicians were self-owned. Like we had our own practices, we had our own groups, or private practices, offices. Even in the emergency department, my faculty at IU were not employed by IU hospitals. They were, like, back then it wasn't IU Health, it was Methodist, and they were all separate, right? But at Wishard, back then it was Wishard, none of them were employed. They had their own physician-owned group that contracted with the hospital to provide clinical services, and then they got a separate salary for their teaching services from the IU School of Medicine. So what that allowed is the physicians have some autonomy in making decisions about how to practice medicine and how to run the emergency department, how to educate the residents. And that was true of not just that was everybody, like the hospitalists in the hospital, the ICU doctors, the pulmonologists, the radiologists. Everyone had some autonomy in terms of how they practiced medicine. But over time, I think a lot of it was driven by increased burden of regulations and the cost associated with all of this, overhead. Doctors now in outpatient practices have to hire multiple employees just to deal with prior authorizations from insurance. Insurance reimbursement is going down. In the last 20 years, physicians have had a 25% decrease in reimbursement from Medicare when you look at adjustment for inflation. 25% decrease. I mean, no one else has that, right? So the burden of actually having private practices really, really increased, and so therefore we had all this consolidation, this vertical consolidation with hospitals and health systems buying up small practices, and that's been very, very prevalent in Indiana, and that's been bad for costs, for quality, and just, as a physician, when you go through all of that education and then you're being told by a bean counter how to practice medicine, it's really, really demoralizing. One example of this is that there was a recent lawsuit in Indianapolis of a long-time internal medicine doctor who worked for IU who was basically told by the administration that he was going to be scheduled for a patient every 10 minutes. And he protested. His patient panel was very sick. He had mostly older adults with very complex medical problems. He complained to the administration, and he was demoted from his medical directorship and then let go from his contract. So he sued them for unfair termination and a bunch of things. And the short story is that he lost the case. But this is the type of stuff that happens within these big consolidated systems. You either walk to their drumbeat or you're gone. And then we have the non-competes where you can't even, try to quit. You can't stay in the same area. They're not interested in what's best for the patients and the community and preserving the physician-patient relationship. I literally know people that have had to leave the state because of non-competes, physicians that have had to leave the state. And then, in terms of cost and stuff, we have one of the highest. I know the study is different than what the RAND study shows, but the RAND study, which is a very large study, shows that we have, in the highest hospital costs in the country. We're in the bottom 5 for physician reimbursement, physician salaries in the country. So we have one of the lowest costs of living, highest hospital costs, low physician salaries. Where is all that money in between going?
So with that joyful description, right? And I'm saying it as my friend, like, look, one of the things about our study's focused on publicly available information. The RAND study has ERISA, it's an effort to pull together ERISA information, but, you know, I was actually, again, having this conversation with Senator Garten yesterday. One of the biggest challenges in this area is that 90% of the information is not publicly available because it's in ERISA insurance plans. I think, and I'm going to get a quick summary and get to your question, but here's the essence of it. Like, and this I remember from my time in Congress. A hospital like the Hancock system, and I don't know some of them over here, have like 4 dozen people that just do paperwork, right? So it's an extraordinary burden. What I have, you know, I think what I try to caution in our group is I actually believe I don't see bad actors. I see a lot of bad incentives. So incentives drive that, which drives the consolidation. I think we've got some real challenges in the general practice of medicine, but we can at least meet the incentives and make it different for folks to be there. And then I think particularly we've got to do a better job in our rural areas helping people become a nurse. And, you know, some of that can, you know, it's why this residency program is so important. Every study is you're much more likely to practice in the community that you sort of grew up and were trained in. So if we can figure out how to use Ivy Tech and other tools to get local folks engaged, we can make a big difference in their life and make a big difference for those communities.
So I have a couple of comments and
yeah,
questions.
please. I usually say that we have questions, but we take comments too. We're happy to have that, yeah.
I would support what she's saying because my father-in-law was a podiatrist, and when the whole Obamacare thing happened, he chose to retire 5 to 10 years before he was going to because of the added things that were being forced on a small practice. Because he was going to have to go from like 20 minutes of patient to 10 just to keep the lights on. So I support what you're saying. I guess a couple concerns or whatever. What I'm hearing as a small business person is the hospitals want us to fix their problem. And what I mean by that is I own a small restaurant business, and if we're short people, we need to be attractive to get people to come work for us, right? And what I heard just described is the hospitals are not attractive to work for, right? Because they're pension pennies, or they're regulating the freedom doctors have. I guess why do we feel that the government should fix a hospital's issue? Why don't we hold the hospitals accountable, these big conglomerates, to do their job? Like, I've got one of my best friends in college did a residency at IU. He's now in Missouri, right? Because he got a better deal out there. He's working for a hospital out there, but he's got a better deal out there. And so I guess that's, as a small business person, why aren't we telling the hospitals, fix your problem, make yourself attractive so somebody coming out of the medical school wants to have a residency with you and then wants to stay with you. Like, one of the things you just said was they're more apt to stay with the system if they have a residency with them, right? And so if I'm Hendricks or I'm IU, if I'm owning a place, I'm going, how do I get people to be a resident here? And how do I maybe do something different over here to save money to pay for that resident? And so, that's some thoughts. My concern is half your group's hospitals.
Sure.
Like, isn't that the Fox and the Hen House?
Well, look,
Sorry, I throw bombs sometimes.
No, but look, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to tell you this, like, first, there's a whole bunch of other folks on there too, and that's the idea, right, is to bring those people together. And second, I think, well, you're in today. That's why I'm here. I mean, right? I came here to talk to you guys because I want folks like you to be a part of it.
Sure.
And I'm happy for you to raise that same concern. But I will also tell you this, like that all sounds great in theory, but what's going to change it? Like, what are you going to do to the hospitals that makes them create an environment where your friend doesn't go to Missouri. Like, the challenge in healthcare that all of us have to accept is there are some things you have to be a competitive, prosperous place. Like, you have to have roads. You have to have access to energy, right? You have to have schools that are decent enough that people want to live there. And if our hospital structure crumbles, we're dead. And so we can sound like, hey, we just got to be tougher on those folks. Well, you know what? Like, you can be, and what happens from that? Like, we're going to have a more robust health system? We're going to have more shortages and less people in healthcare and less hospitals and be on a cycle where it goes away. I can tell you from the folks I talk to, you know, I'm going to use a quick analogy, and it applies to you too. I was with a bunch of, I was talking earlier today, it's a non-healthcare related question, but I think it's a huge problem for our country, is if you poll, 80% of Democrats believe the Republican Party is led by racists, and 80% of Republicans believe the Democrats are led by socialists. And of course we hate each other, because that's what we really believe. I've served in Congress. I didn't meet anybody trying to destroy the country. I met some people, by the way, I thought their ideas would be bad for the country. I'm not saying that. So I said to these young people when I was in Lawrence, Kansas this week, I'm telling you, in my entire career, I never once sat in some secret room with even 2 other Republicans who had some awful race. Never. Not once. I never once had anyone come up to me after I spoke in a forum and say something about, well, you and I, never once in my career, okay? Now, I'm telling you, look at the hospitals. I haven't had one hospital say to me, help me figure out how to screw Indiana's patients. I don't believe that's where they're coming from. I think they have incentives that lead to the outcomes that we don't like. I mean, I hear everything Mercy's saying. Here's the problem, right? Like, she talked to me earlier. Why was 25 years ago 80% of our physicians private, and today 80% are part of a system? Okay, the reason is the incentives, right? There's nothing immoral about your friend, you said your father-in-law who stepped out of being a podiatrist because of Obamacare. Other people were at a different time in their career, and they just said, well, I can't do this burden, so I guess I will join the big system and let them do my paperwork, right? So the problem is, I can't in Indiana, through an Indiana civic organization, like, I can't make the federal paperwork burden be different. What I can do is think about what can we do to make it more competitive. And so again, like, I love the bomb throw. I mean, I take your comments as earnest and sincere. I'm trying to give you a sincere question back and answer back. And the whole reason I'm willing to step in this breach, I mean, look, man, it ain't easy. I mean, I'm not here because it's just fun. You know what I mean? I'm here because I just want to try to make a difference and try to bring people together. But I do believe, and I hear that sentiment, and I understand the others. Look, I mean, it all reminds me, I feel this way sometimes in the healthcare debate between some constituents, I mean, not healthcare, and the education debate, you know, to those of you who are old enough to remember Steve Martin. I don't know if he ever literally did this, but at least Steve Martin's kind of sense of humor is, you know, someone standing there and say, hey man, you stop or I'm gonna shoot. You know, you come on, you get me, you know. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you pull the trigger and you're gone. You know what I mean? So, like, I think that's the dilemma here, is that I hear that sentiment, but I mean, ultimately, if we don't figure out how we have a healthcare system that functions and works better for everybody, we're in big trouble as a state. Sorry for the long answer. Yeah.
I'm going to say, too, it's not just the hospitals. It's our insurance system. It's our medical suppliers. I mean, it's a much bigger problem than that. And I think the fact that you're bringing those to the table, there's some that are not on that list that I'm very disappointed that they're not on the list. I'm sure there are people you've approached. United Healthcare is our biggest system. I did not see them on your list. Boston Scientific is in Spencer. It's one of the biggest medical providers we have around here. They're on that list. So I would love to see that list expand.
And what I will say, if it's fair enough comment for you that didn't hear it, she said, well, there's people I don't see on the list. I mean this with sincerity, and it really is literally why I'm here, is this has been an entrepreneurial effort this year. I mean, again, pretty sophisticated room, so I'll even describe it to you this way. I started it as like a little S Corp because it was like, just I wanted to see, will people do it? Okay. By the end of the middle of the year, we're a C3 now. We're not a C4, so we're not directly lobbying, but we've pulled these folks together. I say, IU's not on it yet. I've had some conversations with IU. I'm not mad at them. It's just we really, almost like the beginning of a business. The reason you guys aren't on it yet is I haven't been able to talk to you yet. So now I'm here, and I hope you will. And really, not only would I love you to be on as chambers, but I would love for you to help us get other small businesses on. I think it's a very fair criticism that I don't want it to just be Lilly and Cummins, because I can tell you, here's the way these conversations go, even in our current forum. And it's, it's kind of fun. It's part of Diane knows from a part of my world, right, is somebody from the medical device group will say, we really got to be talking about pharmaceuticals. And I'll say, well, yeah, we need to really be talking about medical devices too, right? And we've had a conversation about self-insured plans, and some of my big companies are like, well, that's not the way self-insured plans work. I mean, and I'm going to be fair to them, I'm not going to quote the company, we negotiate these, you guys are a lot bigger than your average small business. Well, it'd be a lot better for me in this organization if it was a small business that said that, because I didn't feel like I had to be the person to speak up. You know what I mean? So we'd love to have you, and appreciate it. But anyway, thank you for that comment. Yeah.
So, in my mind, I'm thinking about the community ecosystem, right? You talked about it. It's schools, it's hospitals, it's amenities, it's infrastructure. That's the ecosystem. But in this ecosystem, businesses can't attract talent if they can't afford to provide benefits to them. Benefits are an expectation, right, from employees. So what are you doing to address the issue of the cost that is on businesses to provide benefits?
Yeah, so I would say that is the kind of topic I hope we can go in year 2 and 3. And the vision we're trying to accomplish here is to have a roundtable where where the hospitals and the insurance companies can hear from businesses like Duke and others, right? Like, hey, there's the challenge for us. We've got to figure it out. I mean, my vision on self-insured plans is, okay, so we have 2/3 self-insured plans. Let's have the laws and structure in place to make those the best self-insured plans in the country, where you really do have access to the best prices. And again, I mean, I know we're closing up, I assume we finish at 10, right? But not to get too in the weeds, but just this, so I'm having a conversation out of the big hearing we just testified, and there was this talk about self-insured plans, and then the insurance companies were saying like, well, wait a minute, but everybody gets the same contract. There's not different prices for different people. And I said, okay, so walk me through this, okay? So we have one price, we negotiate that price with the hospital. Well, here's what ends up happening though. Some very earnest employers go to the hospital and they negotiate different prices, and then in those cases, the insurance company manager of the plan charges the lower prices that individual company negotiated. Does that make sense? So they have one contract, but really there still is a way around it. And so what could we do to broaden the pool of that kind of negotiation, so that it wasn't just the one company that went there, but more of a pool of folks that were able to negotiate. And presumably the pool should be able to negotiate better prices than one company could. Does that make sense, right? If you were part of a bigger issue. Yeah.
At that point, in United Healthcare, the chambers in Hendricks County went together to provide a small business health insurance program to our members. And there's a fee to be a part of that insurance program, but if you go strictly to Hendricks Regional, the pricing is a little better. So that happens all the time, with regards to, well, there's a price, but then if you go strictly to this purveyor, it's a better price.
Yeah, that's right. And I do think what I understand just from peripheral conversations I've had, and please understand, one of the principles of this is not like the Congress is going to show up and solve all of our problems. It's very much the opposite of that. But what I have picked up is, I think, frankly, the west side of Indianapolis has a lot more of these kind of direct provider relationships than many other areas of the state do. Like your region is one of the regions that probably has the most kind of direct relationships. It's something I think I've heard and understood. Yeah, sorry.
So my observation is very anecdotal here, but so I have two daughters, 18 and 22, both going into healthcare. My younger one is going to go for X-ray tech. My older one is a senior at UND, and she's going to be a respiratory therapist. So she leaves the house at 6 a.m., comes home at 8 p.m., exhausted, burned out.
Yeah.
Right? So I hear your point to just seeing her in this phase of where she's at. I mean, we're overworking not just our doctors, but all of the people within our healthcare, and that is huge. I mean, how do you attract nurses? How do you attract young people who have a completely different idea of what work should be to a place where they know they're going to be overworked from day one, and maybe not have the quality of family life that they would like to have. And also one of the things, so all of my experiences with daughters and with their friends, and a lot of those girls are going into healthcare. But then I also see their boyfriends and their boyfriends. We have done a great job in the last decade of really pushing trades, of really making sure that boys in particular understand that they have options that aren't college. But at the same time, that has hurt pushing boys to college who might be doing some of these same positions, because I don't see any of the boyfriends, fiancés of the girls that I'm a part of in my family, that none of them are going to college. Not one.
It's great. It's a great point. Like, one of the things I think one of the challenges we face, I think one of the challenges we face as a broader society is like our inability to just talk about things that are just factually true, even if we don't like what that means. So let me give you an example that applies to both education and to healthcare. I'm a father of two daughters and a husband to a wife who's a lawyer and runs the Central Indiana Regional Development Authority. It is great for our society that women have opportunities they didn't have 30 and 40 years ago. This room of professionals is an example of that. But one of the challenges that brings to us as a society is, 50 years ago, you had an artificial path of really talented people into teaching and nursing because women didn't have the same kinds of opportunities, right? And we just aren't kind of willing as a society to both acknowledge that and then think about, okay, so what does that mean? If we benefited for decades just from the fact that you had these really talented folks funneling towards a couple really important professions, maybe now you have to change the incentive base. And I really love your comments, because I think it's like the thing we have to wrap our mind around as a community and as a state is like, you are not a more valuable human being because you're willing to do healthcare. Restaurant workers matter. My mom worked at Delta Faucet at the factory. We all are valuable as human beings, and yet, there are certain essential things we have to have as a community for a community to function, right? Like, we have to have police officers, we have to have teachers, we have to have nurses. And I think Indiana has to decide, and we'll see where the debate goes, do we want to be one of the most attractive places in the country for physicians and folks working in healthcare, or one of the least? You know what I mean? And the interesting thing is, and a lot of folks, folks in the healthcare world know this, but the irony of this is Doc Bowen, who was a physician governor, in the 70s, I think that math's right? Yes, the 70s, made Indiana, through a set of laws, one of the most attractive places in the country to practice practice medicine for a very long time. And then the landscape changed underneath that, and we haven't really had the changes in place, and they're not the same changes now to make that different. Emily's standing up and giving me a very, if nothing else, if nothing else from my time in Congress, I know the, hey, this is the hook sign that it's time to go. Look, I had one goal here, not to change everybody's hearts and minds, but to basically hope that you would see that at least one tiny beacon of earnestness is trying to bring this together to make a difference. We're not the only beacon, by the way. I don't want to pretend to that. And I do with sincerity. What I'll do with Emily's help is, one, I'll send you the study, which you can look at yourself. But second, I'll try to get some other information to you, because I really am, you know, I drove over here on a Friday morning, not because I needed more people to hear my voice. I've done plenty of that, right? It's because we're trying to, you know, grow this thing and bring the entire state together to try to solve problems. And we'd love to have you guys be a part of it. Okay? Thank you all very much. Have a great day.
Thank you all so much for coming today. Vicki, I also just wanted to say thank you for letting us use your facilities today. And everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.